5 years ago, Jeffery Thompson had routine surgery, but something went wrong. Jeff's heart went out, and he died in the arms of his wife.
I began having stomach pains, severe stomach pains, initially I just had no idea what it was.
The stress Jeffery Thompson was under running his law practice had taken a toll on his body.
I maintained that stress, and it continued to work on me, and it also continued to work on my body. And eventually it broke down.
Jeffery developed diverticulitis and needed surgery to remove part of his intestine. But after the operation, his body continued to hemorrhage.
And then I looked into the surgeon's eyes, and I could see concern on his face. My internal clock told me that I was getting ready to die, and I only had a few seconds of consciousness left. I reached up to grab my wife. I was just wanting to tell her how much I loved her and tell her that I was getting ready to leave her.
And I went to him, and it was right after that I lost him. You know, I could tell he left. He took my hand, and then he was gone.
Jeff Thompson joins us now live, thankfully, for the rest of his story. Jeff, it's great to have you with us.
Terry, honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Can we go kind of back to the beginning,
Sure.
first of all, and set the stage here? You were a very successful lawyer. You were working 70 to 80 hours a week.
Correct.
And it eventually took a toll on your body. Tell us about that.
Well, it did. You know, my practice it takes us around the country. I'm fortunate. I'm with a wonderful firm, but we have clients in every state, wow, which requires a lot of travel. And as you probably know, it takes it out of you. And over time, it broke my body down, unfortunately.
So here you are. You're going into this surgery for a stomach issue.
Right.
Nothing that should have been fatal. Were you prepared for anything bad to happen? Or?
Well, I was not. I will tell you, my wife and I had a feeling that something was going to happen. I will tell you that, but obviously nothing like that. I had told my assistant on the way out the door the day before surgery, tell my clients I'm up and running Monday. Wow. Well, that was my idea. That wasn't God's, obviously.
Well, sometimes God sends an earthquake,
Exactly.
doesn't he, to kind of get our attention.
Exactly.
So here you are. You have the surgery.
Yeah.
The surgery itself, the correction actually took place, but
Yes.
24 hours later, the doctors pulled back the sheet in your hospital room. Your vital signs were not good. And what did they find?
Well, I looked like I was pregnant, and what they had found is that I had been bleeding internally, and apparently for some time, and I literally looked pregnant. When I looked down, I realized immediately something was
Wow.
terribly wrong.
Tell me what happened then, because you said as you went into this
Right.
blackout that we just heard described, that your senses were heightened, that the room became very different than it was when you were conscious. Tell us exactly what happened.
Well, right as I looked down at my stomach, I began to die, and my sensations from my extremities began to leave me, and I knew what was happening.
You were conscious of it.
I was conscious. I knew I only had a few seconds left of consciousness. And I reached up, grabbed my wife, and I wanted to tell her one more time how much I loved her.
Yeah.
She's an incredible person.
It's hard at those
It is.
points, yes.
And I began to rise out of my body up into that room. And I knew what was happening. I have never been more alive.
Were you afraid?
No, that was the incredible thing. I have never felt such peace and such love. Wow. As I rose up into that room, I could see everything down below me that was occurring. And of all the profound things I could have thought or said, I said, this is very interesting. Leave it to a lawyer.
Leave it to a lawyer,
Right.
I was just going to say.
Well, I got to the top of the room, and I was looking down below me, watching everything in complete peace. And then that's when the light entered.
And tell us about that.
It began at the ceiling, Terry, and it began to filter out into the room. And I tell you, I struggle for the words to describe the beauty and the warmth of that light. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. The only thing I could compare it to is when you wake up in the morning and you see the sun's rays coming through and you know God's there. Multiply it times 1,000, and that's what I experienced.
Wow.
Incredible. And as it began to filter into that room and hit objects, colors came flooding out of them like I've never seen. And at that time, my senses became enhanced.
And what were you thinking at this point?
Well, I was absorbing it all.
Yeah.
I was enjoying it. I was in complete peace and comfort. I was overwhelmed by what was happening to me. but there was no pain and there was no fear.
Wow.
There was nothing but sweetness.
Where were you at spiritually at this point in your life?
I had been a Christian since I was a teenager, and I loved God, and you know, went to church, and went to Sunday school, helped teach Sunday school. I've had a love for God for a long time, but I tell you, I never understood how much He loved me until this happened.
Wow.
I'd been told all about it. I'd read it, but I never truly understood it.
So suddenly you're in the presence of what you're sensing is God Himself. Right. And
right.
What did that do to you? What did that do to you as a person, as a Christian?
Well, at the moment, it overwhelmed me. Had I had a body, I would have gone to the floor. I can tell you there's nothing like having God poured into your soul. Wow. And that's what happens. He poured into my very soul, and I was overwhelmed by it.
So you're in this amazing place, and you're feeling and seeing everything in extremes, and it's beautiful and peaceful. How did you wind up going back into your body?
Well, during this process, God infused a number of things into me, a number of thoughts, a number of things. But I had a fleeting thought, Terry, and that fleeting thought was, well, what about Madeline, my wife? And what about my son? Yeah. And it was a fleeting thought, which is unusual. I love them so dearly, but I wanted to be with God. But I had that fleeting thought, and that's when God said, you're going to go back.
And what did you feel then?
Well, the most immediate thing that happened was everything stopped below me. When I asked, well, what about Madeline and Will, everything stopped. It was as if someone put a pause button on a television. And everything stopped, and everything went silent. It was complete peace. And then He said, you're going to go back. Now, He infused things into me, and then I shot back in my body like I'd been hit by a lightning bolt. And I remember jolting in the bed and looking up, and the doctor was standing over saying, I'm losing him, I've got to get him back in surgery, but I've got to get consent. How am I going to get consent? And then he shook his head and he turned to my wife and said, you can give consent. And then I blacked out.
Wow.
And then it was 10 hours later I woke up for my second surgery.
You talked about God infusing things into you, Jeff.
Yes.
What do you feel God spoke to your heart?
Well, there were several things, and Terry, the first one is, and please, anyone that happens to be listening, God loves you more than you've ever known. He loves you beyond anything you've ever known. And if we fully understood the love that He has for us, I'm telling you, we would wake up with different priorities. Yeah. Terry, I used to wake up with a knot in my stomach, and I wake up with joy in my heart. And the second thing was, and I said this, I have got to become a better person. And now please hear me. Becoming a better person does not get you to heaven. You get to heaven through Christ and His blood. But what happened was when I was placed up to God's light, I realized how far short I fell. Yeah. And I realized all the times I could have helped others and brought them to Christ and failed to do it.
When you feel His intense love, it makes you want to live differently.
It does. Yeah. It makes you, and the closer you get to Him, the more you know you need Him.
Ultimately, how do you feel like this has changed you?
Well, I tell you, as I mentioned earlier, I used to wake up with a knot in my stomach. I wake up with peace and joy. And the other thing is, I began to realize, you know what? My career is not everything.
Yeah.
My God is.
Yes.
And it changes everything. You think differently, you feel different. Now, I love what I do. I've got an incredible firm that I've worked with. The people I'm with are just wonderful, loving people. And we love working together, and I still love what I do. But there's nothing sweeter than God's love.
Well, that's an amazing, powerful picture of God really dropping Himself right into the middle of someone's life just to say, I love you.
Incredible.
Yeah. You know, we hear that over and over and over again, Jeff, that we can't imagine, that eye has not seen, ear has not heard what He's prepared, but also the deep love He has for us. Thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you.
And if you would like to hear more of Jeff's story, or you want to share it with your friends who might not be watching with you right now, all you have to do is log on to cbn.com. We have the complete story and video version there, and you'll have a chance to really listen again to what Jeff experienced. Thank you. Pat?